Hi everyone, welcome back to the Well Workplaces podcast. I'm Tom Bosner, your host, and today I'm really excited to be introducing a new series on the podcast, which is all about working parents and women at work. And to help me get through this series, I've brought in a new expert to the group, which is Poppy Griffiths. Now, Poppy Griffiths is a professional coach and speaker on all things high performance. She's the director of and founder of UnlimitU, a high performance consultancy that's passionate about supporting people through career life success of working parents, women, and positive mental well-being of people in general. Poppy, welcome to the show. How you going?
Thanks, Tom. Lovely to be here. And I think it's terrific that you pulled together this podcast for working parents. I'm sure we can share some great tips and have some good conversations. So thank you for having me, and thanks for that generous introduction.
Oh, no worries at all. Yeah, it's great to be talking about parenting. And when I put the video on, I just realised that this room that I'm in is kind of ironic for the session with my son's cot there in the background. And also I was just saying to Poppy, I've just been away in Perth for a week where we left our kids with my family there. So it's kind of interesting time to talk about, I guess, careers, but also how the hell you manage things as a working parent, and how do you kind of prioritize work and obviously family, and that's probably in the wrong order: family first, then work second. So we're really interested today to talk about probably looking at how do you manage that overwhelm, which I know I've definitely felt in the last week, if I'm being honest, and also the guilt that sometimes can come with being a working parent or just being a parent in general. So Poppy, we might kick off with a really obvious question, or maybe not so obvious question, but why do you think working parents really matter? Or why is this topic important to you anyway?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a good place to start, Tom. I think the data even over the last couple of years, based on the pandemic that we're facing, what's coming out from McKinsey and even the Centre of Perinatal Excellence here in Australia, it just shows that the impacted numbers are so large. People may not be aware there's actually over 7 million families in Australia. And 70% of them, where there's couples, both people are working. So increasingly the demands are high. And the last couple of years, 63% of parents are burnt out. And in the Great Resignation, when we're talking about that, we know that, more working parents are resigning globally than their non-working counterparts. And there's no doubt that just that work-life balance and the management of demands of being a parent and maintaining your career, it's hard, and it's the number one culprit for all of these resignations. So there's definitely a need there. Absolutely, there's a need there. And I think also too for businesses, increasingly they're seeing the business case, and they're recognising that the desire from individuals to have more support is there. And even late last year, family benefits has now become in the top 3 most desired employee benefits from Australian employees. So, it's the demand is there. Most working parents need and want support. Unfortunately, there's still a bit of a gap. Probably it shows only 50% of people in Australia who are working are getting the support that they need from their employers. So, we all know there's heaps of advantages for employers from, attracting great talent, just even generally being able to support the well-being of their parents, to, promote themselves as an employer of choice. There's so much opportunity, that there's probably still a bit to be done by way of supporting working parents in a way that's going to be helpful.
Yeah, perfect. And I think, the last couple of years or longer now, that flexibility piece has been important and it's been talked about, but it's also created, as the stats show, for working parents, it's often created really longer working days, and also with lack of separation sometimes from the home, it's created for, and I'm speaking also as a parent here, just that overwhelm of going, well, how do I really kind of separate or try and have that nice balance between work and home? And when those working days were so long, and also there was a lot of stress other stress happening in the world, and there still is, it's created that really, I guess, those that stress cycle, that anxiety cycle, and the result of that for a lot of people was overwhelm. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, I'd be interested to hear from you, like that sort of that overall result being that feeling of overwhelm. And also I've heard, I was speaking with a colleague the other day, and she was talking about mother's guilt. So it is something that it comes up in conversation a lot. But with mastering overwhelm, or kind of getting on top of that, how do we get better at that as working parents? What do you think?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, Tom, too, you hit the nail on the head when you say just the overwhelm that everyone faces, especially in more recent times. It's only increasing. And, the demands that are placed on us with the blur of work and home boundaries definitely is contributing. And I think every single working parent here, and who listens to this would identify that we all face this really daunting, unexplained, complex phase of life. And we're not just building our careers, we're actually building our careers as working parents. And I think no matter whatever your specifics are as an individual, you're not alone as a working parent. And I mean, as a career coach, and world-renowned career coaches will absolutely tell you over and over that they're yet to meet any working parent that's got a really intimate and clear view on how to fit career and family together without this, big overwhelm. And it's individual, and it's dynamic, and it's unique to each of us. And there aren't any silver bullets. I always say the problem's the problem. You're not the problem. The problem's the problem. But what can we do about it? In answer to your question around overwhelm, there's a couple of things here, but there's some really 4 basic ideas, just that I think is really helpful to get people to think about. I say, know your end game. Right? So when we've got clarity on what we want and where we want to go, with more of a long-term positive outlook, we get so much less caught up in that day-to-day overwhelm and that never-ending task list, and that feeling as working parents of just relentless exhaustion. So it's really important that we have that longer-term view on our end game. That's absolutely one. I think secondly, investing your time wisely. So I always say, just prune out your calendar that doesn't align with your goals, with your family goals, with your end game. I mean, of course, we've got to think about the short term, day to day, but, perhaps it's even about saying no to 10% of activities in your family's agenda that's just totally misaligned to what your end game is. And another thing, just keep a task done list. I think so many of us have this to-do list, right? But if we actually focus on what are the tasks that we've done for the day, what are the wins, what have we completed, because the task list never ends, right? And uncompleted tasks take such an enormous anxiety and mental load for all of us. So I always say, focus on those wins and the things that you are completing each day and celebrate them, because we should be. And making the time for time out. That's the other thing. There's always going to be things to do, places to be, stuff to be done as working parents. We have to actively schedule time out, right? So if that even means, is it 15 minutes, and you have to actually schedule it in your diary, to have a cup of tea, to read the paper, to have a walk around the block. It's really important that we do this, because we continually feel so consumed and overwhelmed that, we're no good to anyone when we're like that. And I think having time away, from our own internal overwhelm, and by way I mean that if you're not very good at making time for your cup of tea, what could you do? How can you throw yourself into others? What can you do to invest your time in others? Because I think we often internalize our overwhelm, and we're so busy on our own worries. Just spending some time to actually engage and connect with others, other working parents, other colleagues, that really reduces our internal worry and that stress and overwhelm. So a couple of 4 basic ideas I like to share.
I love it. Yeah. And I think, I don't know about you, but for kind of defining an end game, or what are my goals? Sometimes maybe the overwhelm just doesn't allow you to get to that point. So, what do you do if you aren't sure, you're not really sure as to what matters to you as an individual. And I'm saying that as someone that can probably relate to that feeling of going,
what
I
is
know
it?
I should have.
I don't know.
What is that thing? And everyone's listened to Simon Sinek, and then you're like, oh man, what's my
Yeah.
why? Like, yeah, you start
Some
losing. You think you're losing your marbles because you can't really get point your finger on what it is that you're all about.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think, I mean, Tom, it's really knowing, it's easy to say here are 4 basic things, but hey, we all know that this takes time, it takes effort, and it takes dedication. And knowing what's meaningful can feel like a really big question, as you're saying, and not a question that we can answer just, straight away. I like to say if you're not 100% sure what you want, or, if, what you want is going to be meaningful to you, which is most important, form a hypothesis or two. So, like in a career sense, like where do you want to go in your career? Do you want to be the managing director? Do you want to be a director, senior manager, project officer? Like where do you want to go? Or from another hypothesis, by way of, do you want a job that allows you flexibility to be around for the kids more, but also to lean into your career? So it's really helpful to actually form a hypothesis or two and then run experiments with them. So test them. Like think about your existing job. Is it about working remotely for a month? Is it about taking on an assignment that would allow you to build new skills and really lean into, career growth? Or, can you take something off your boss's plate or participate in something, a cross-company initiative that's going to give you that exposure? I think it's really important that we run experiments. Like life is a journey, right? Don't think that you have to have all the answers and it all has to be perfect now. It's just about pressure testing and holding yourself accountable. And I also say have lots of conversations with people. So like talk to people who are doing what you want to do, or, ask people that you admire, that, ask them lots of questions, or I guess, family members in your working parent community who have a really well-rounded view, I think, of the situation that you're in. It sort of gives you that flavour, and I think often validates some of your own ideas if you're on the money with, maybe what your end game wants to be or your goals. And the last one, just think long term. I think as working parents, we often get so bogged down in the overwhelm of the day-to-day and just getting stuff done that we don't really think long term. So in a career sense, like designing our career is not just searching for a job, right? Like ask yourself not what job do I want, but what life do I want? Ask yourself, where do I want to be in 5 years or 10 years? Because when we actually look at it with that much longer term view, it's easier to sort of, I guess, subscribe and achieve, or at least have a goal towards an end game.
Yeah, great. And I think as well with people when they start early in their career, because we're talking about the working career, and then it so happens that when you're maybe in your 30s or earlier or later or whatever, you then become a parent, and sort of a lot of people end up starting their careers out and they're very achievement orientated. So they're like, I need to get to this level, to the next, etc. And then suddenly you're a parent, which is a great thing, and you start a family. You kind of feel like your time or your working days a bit more pressurized because you've got less time to do things. And so then you feel like you sort of, when you start off, you feel like you're kind of late for work, and you feel like you're leaving work earlier.
Behind on everything.
Yeah. So kind of, I guess with your tips there as well, I guess you're like what you said is it's really around what life do you want to have, really, not necessarily what job do you want to have, and also that your career does change, and it's okay for 5 years if you're not taking the foot off the pedal, but your priorities shift so that you're not achievement orientated and you're more searching for that meaning, I guess, in what you're doing. I think as well, maybe throughout the pandemic, people are looking really now for more meaning in their careers, aren't they? They're not necessarily wanting to just make more money or just climb the career ladder, that kind of thing. I'm wondering though, from your perspective, what are some of the stressors that stop people from pursuing the the meaningful career pathway? Is it really just the getting overwhelmed, or is there more to that?
Yeah, I think that's it's a good question, Tom. I think there's probably many things at play here, and
Mm,
again, everyone's career is and parenting situation is unique, but there's probably some natural watch outs. I call them stressors that absolutely do prevent us from pursuing what we want. And it's just worthy to be mindful of them. I think often as working parents, we suddenly feel so deep into our careers that it feels too daunting to make big changes or any change, because let's be honest, we've got mortgages, we've got kids education, we've got rent, we want to go on holidays, the thing I do say here is mid-career professionals can and do make changes, and you can absolutely turn the ship, but the speed at which you turn your ship may be slower, and just accepting that. So, with kids and finances front and center for you, you may explore, the exploration stage may take longer. Maybe it's about taking less risk. But the key thing here is come back and really ask yourself, like in 20 years' time, and realizing that I stayed in this career forever and always, like, are you going to be happy or are you going to be unhappy? So again, when you're worried about being deep into a career and thinking, God, this change is just all too much, flash forward to your older self and just say, like, God, would I be happy with this decision I've made? I think finances obviously naturally is another one where people stay in jobs and roles for money, right? We all have to work to live. But what steps can we take, right, as working parents that will provide a bit more of a financial cushion for us and create what I call that psychological freedom? So, is it about creating a budget and looking for, I guess, lower cash flows possibly that you need, each month? Could you, even look at scenarios where that would allow you to compromise possibly on a few of your, lifestyle things for a period of time? I
mm.
think even for a lot of people that are thinking about changing jobs, just sometimes in the lead up, given it can take longer as a working parent, sometimes carve out a financial buffer so that when you're actually finally ready to make that change, you're in a better position to act on it. So yeah, finances, deep in career. I think time, let's be honest, we're also time poor. And I think regardless of working parent, not enough of us make the time to work through, the important things that, are of value to us in life. We always say we'll get to it tomorrow or next week. And
Mm, mm,
I think experts will tell you that, and I myself would say, I don't think, you'd ever meet a person who hasn't benefited from sitting down and just dedicating the time to nutting out what they want in their career. And if that means putting time in your calendar every week or every fortnight and asking yourself, what does a meaningful career look like for me? Then that's great, because we know that when we dedicate the time, the balls start to roll. And before you know it, like change is inevitable. So
yep.
yeah, there are a couple of the stresses, I guess. I'm sure. What about you? What do you feel like as a working parent? What holds you back?
Yeah, yeah, no, that's a good question for me. I think your financial sort of comments were spot on. I guess you kind of you've got plenty of things to consider, and when it switches from two working parents to one in those earlier years, that's you somehow get through it, but you kind of like it's quite stressful before that happens. You kind of like, gee, how are we going to do this on one income with all the things that come with that? I think another one for me, and just I guess a personal sort of recent story for us, is we've recently had a death in our family, and it kind of just made me think about. You've got all this time, and you do run around like like a headless chicken. Is that the right expression? Maybe I've ruined that. Yeah, but I guess at the end of the day, what have you got? It's really the time that you've spent with people and the relationships that you have. So I think something like that just makes you realize that work is important. Yes, yes, you need. It's nice to have a meaningful career, but the people that are around you on the journey are probably more important. And so it kind of just makes you think more family orientated and really just spending that quality time with your family, but also to get to that point, to realize that that's important, you do need to have the time carved out in your week to actually reflect on your week. And I
Yeah.
really liked your point on, if you're doing things through your day, really having that time at the end of the week or end of day to go, I did well today. I got a few things done. These things were driving me up the wall and I've got them done and they're out of the way. I think if you don't do that, you just end up overwhelmed because you're like, oh, gee, the stuff, the tasks or the projects are just flowing into each week and each day. Yeah. So that, they're probably my main things that are, have been stresses for me. And I think, the realization really that working is important, and I love obviously what I do, but your family and your kids and all that are obviously a much higher priority, which kind of then makes you think, gee, how do I bring some, the whole thing of chasing work-life balance is obviously a bit of a
yes, always
it's a
on
bit of a
everyone's tongue.
yeah, that's right. And I know that, I definitely don't have the right work-life balance. And in the past, it was horribly skewed towards work more than everything else. For working parents, like what do you talk about with them for creating work-life
Balance.
balance, or does that even exist?
Yeah, it's interesting, Tom. I mean, look, I was similar to you. I've gone absolutely through bouts in my life too, where I've thought, yep, I'm going to get the balance all right and it's going to look like
Yeah.
this and it's going to be great. And I'm like 3 days in and I'm thinking, this is a disaster.
Yeah.
So funnily enough, I actually say, and look, the research will tell you as well that, work-life balance actually may not be the answer for all of us, as much as people go, what? And by that, I mean just my own experiences with those I coach, what I read from other experts. Balance can actually be really misguided for us because essentially what it means is that we're always having to make trade-offs amongst the most important aspects of our life. When we're at work, the trade-off is we're not with family. When, we're with family, the trade-off is we're not at work. Where's the time for friends and the community? What about ourselves? So I like to sort of almost frame it as like, think about work-life balance in a more gratifying way, which is work-life integration. And, that concept won't be new to a lot of people. I'm sure a lot of people go, yeah, I'm continually trying to integrate my work and life. And I think COVID and the pandemic has given us even more of an opportunity to think about this idea. And why I say this is I do think this approach of integration allows for better sustained performance and also better happiness in all areas of our life. But one thing I do coach people around is like, if you want to have better integration, there's probably 3 key principles that are really great to keep in mind. And funnily enough, business professionals, and myself included, are not very good at mastering these skills. But the 3 questions we should ask is like true self. So like, what is our true self? And that's very much like thinking about our values, thinking about like our whole self. What's my whole self? And the idea behind that is that we're one person, right? And we play multiple roles in our life always. And then the last one I say is creative self. So, and by way, I mean, we can all be creative, like, right, to get the best outcome. There's no one way. So basically, I think what we need to do is ask ourselves more, how can I lean into being my true self, my whole self, and my creative self? And I think by true self, one exercise I do with people is actually as simple as draw 4 circles, right? And the 4 circles should represent the most important key areas of your life. So for me, that's family, career, the community and my friends, and time for myself, like my personal self. And draw those circles, vary the size depending on how much you value each, and then look at if they overlap. So what areas of those, important areas overlap? And to think about overlap, like think about what are your goals and your interests and your values in each of those areas. And you need to ask yourself, like, actually, are they compatible or are they in opposition? And I often say to people, like, what can you actually do where you can bring more alignment to your 4 circles so that, and, perfect alignment like a tree trunk, that's not ever going to be 100% achievable for everyone. But what we can do is we can start to think about, well, what could I do to bring my career, and how I value my career so that my family respects it and understands it and buys in? What can I do with my family, or vice versa, that would allow them to flex into, what I value doing in the community with the school? Or so I think that principle really allows us to lean much more into our values and start to consider our true selves and the things that are most important to us and how we can better align them.
Yeah.
And I think whole self by way of, as I said, like, we're one person, right? And we have multiple roles in our life, but to ensure that we owe it to ourselves, right, to have integrity in all aspects. So one thing I suggest is, like, we've all got strengths, right? Write down what your 5 strengths are, and then think about how could you actually utilize some of those strengths more readily in each of the important areas of your life. So, if you're really strong at, achievement or community, or whatever your strengths are, like, how can you bring that into your career? How can you bring that more into what you choose to do every day? I think sometimes we're really not aware of our strengths, and they play such an important part in us being able to show up well. And then creative self is just, I think, goals, right? Like, we all like to have goals. We're all working towards something, but how can you be a bit more creative in getting there? So there's not one pathway to ever achieving what we want to achieve. Think about 3 different ways that you could get to that goal that you're trying to achieve, and think about the resources you'll need and, the challenges that you may overcome. But I think when we actually give ourselves options, we are far more, we can keep our eyes on the prize, so that when it all does go wrong or we're not reaching the goal, we've got alternative pathways. And that's what I mean by saying being creative, leaning into your creative self. Have options, give yourself options, and make various ways to get to your goals.
Yep, beautiful. Oh, I love that. That's cool. I love the strength stuff. We did an exercise actually probably 5 years ago, or maybe longer. I've been at Pinnacle for 13 years, so maybe it was 5 years ago. The exercise was using the values in action, or the VIA.
Yes, the VIA character strengths.
Is it a strength finder thing? Yeah. So anyway, it was my experience was quite interesting, because prior to that I didn't think so. I did the assessment, and I did a couple of other similar ones, and creativity was my number one thing. But if you look at me and you look at what I do, you'd be like, where
Tom, you're so creative.
where and how are you creative? And so what I actually did from those 5 years ago, and then realizing that just kept coming up, was I started doing more things that helped me. So the start of the day is normally around creative type activity. I would say that what we're doing now is actually creative in the way that it's, comes together, and it's a conversation, obviously, and there's heaps of other things that happen around it. But I found that when I started doing more creative things, it really helped me through the last couple of years that have been obviously a challenging time for everyone. But so, really starting the day off with your strengths was my experience, and it just made me realize that I'm not good at a lot of other things, and then I'll in a business bring people in that can do that, but not a lot of people in our business don't do what I do. So it's kind of like realizing that, and then realizing that career-wise or working-wise, I just need to keep doing what I'm
leaning
good
into.
at. Yeah.
And also, so often when we find them out, we think, that's so me, but it hasn't necessarily been in our conscious awareness. And until we actually can label them for ourselves, we don't, like for you, like you probably were like, well, how can I, now that I know creativity's there, how can I lean into it? As you said, like early in the morning when productivity's high, and I can, I can really maximize. And I think the other thing I loved about what you said then is sharing it with those you work with. So it's one thing to know our own strengths, but share it with your colleagues, share it with your manager, your boss, and even your family members, because when we all share our strengths, we can actually more readily play to them respectively, rather than sort of trying to jump around crazily, adding value in where we may not necessarily be as strong. But the VIA character, maybe we can actually share that after this. It's a freely accessible strengths survey. It takes 15 minutes and you'll get a really good idea around what your, strong character traits are. It's a great place to start.
Yeah, really good for job crafting as well, in terms of internally going, oh, okay, I know you kind of signed up for this type of job, but we know you don't really, well, you're really great at this other bit. Let's just sort of tweak it a little bit. And that's what I needed to do for my own sort of role in Pinnacle Health Group, because there was a lot of things that I wasn't that excited about. And but what got me about coming out with my strength, or not coming out with my strength, but realizing my strength, was that creativity. Like, I've come from a science background. I'm like, this is so different to what I did academically at high school and uni and stuff. So it was like, that was the main thing for me, was like, oh God, that's really different. And I think
as we grow up, I think it's quite common from a creativity point of view. We get sort of pigeoned in what we do, and you see science as a real technical role. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean that creativity is not a part of that and doesn't contribute to what you do within that role. So yeah, it's great. And I think when you know that, it gives you a lot more flow and more enjoyment too in the tasks that you do choose to take on in that role. Yes, lots to be said about strengths.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's a really good point. We might attach the VIA link through in the show notes for those that are interested. Poppy, thanks so much for your time on this one, and we've got plenty of other aspects of this to dive into in further topics around working parents and working women. So thanks again, Poppy, and take care.
Absolute pleasure, Tom. Thank you for having me. Great conversation. Bye.